You're listening to the Tech Road Report, where we break down the latest in transportation technology in plain language, from behind the wheel and out on the street. Today, it's all about Tesla's newest full self-driving update, version 14.2.2.4. Is this the update that finally moves FSD from promising but quirky to trustworthy most of the time? Or is it just another incremental step with a shiny version number? Over the next 20 minutes, we'll take you into a real-world test. Dense city streets, freeways, suburban neighborhoods, construction zones, school areas, and tricky intersections. We'll walk through how the system behaved when we had to step in, and whether this actually feels safer or just more confident. By the end, you'll have a clearer sense of whether 14.2.2.4 is meaningfully better than what came before, and for whom it might make sense to turn it on, and where you might still want to keep it off. Let's start with the basics. Tesla calls this system full self-driving, but legally and practically it's still driver assistance. The human in the driver's seat is responsible at all times, must be ready to take over instantly, and is on the hook if something goes wrong. The system is effectively an advanced driving assistant that can steer, brake, accelerate, and navigate through traffic, but it's not recognized as a fully autonomous system by regulators. Each new version, like this 14.2.2.4 update, is Tesla's attempt to refine how the car sees the world, predicts what other road users will do, and chooses what to do next. Historically, we've seen big swings between versions. Some have gotten smoother but more hesitant, others more assertive but occasionally unnerving. And each update sparks the same question: is this actually better or just different? For this test, we used a recent Tesla Model Y equipped with the full self-driving package, running the 14.2.2.4 software. Our driver stayed hands-on, eyes up, following Tesla's instructions. Supervise constantly, be ready to intervene. Over several days, we put in a mix of urban, suburban, and highway miles in real traffic. Delivery vans double-parked, pedestrians stepping out mid-block, cyclists hugging the edge of narrow lanes, and impatient human drivers doing all the things they're not supposed to do. We'll focus less on the technical jargon and more on what you'd actually feel if you were in the driver's seat. Our drive begins on a busy late-morning weekday in a mid-sized city. Think multi-lane arterials, traffic lights at almost every block, a steady stream of pedestrians, and a lot of random chaos. Rideshare pickups, food delivery scooters, and trucks blocking part of the lane. We tap the right stalk to enable FSD. Immediately, the visualization on the center screen springs to life. Cars, bikes, pedestrians, cones, lane lines, and curbs all rendered as colored shapes. The car eases away from the curb, signals, and merges into traffic. Right away, one thing stands out: smoothness. In earlier versions, starts could be jumpy, like a new driver working a clutch, too much throttle, then backing off, then correcting again. In this version, the initial acceleration feels more consistent and less robotic. It pulls out briskly but not aggressively, more like a confident human than a nervous teenager. At the first light, there's a left turn with oncoming traffic and no protected arrow, what's known as an unprotected left turn. These have been some of the hardest maneuvers for Tesla's system. They require judging gaps in fast-moving traffic, predicting whether an oncoming car might speed up or slow down, and deciding when to commit. The light turns green. Our car creeps forward to get a better view, edging into the intersection, wheels pointed straight, good driving practice in case of a rear-end collision. Oncoming traffic is steady, with short gaps but nothing clearly safe. In older versions, the system sometimes hovered awkwardly in the middle of the intersection, creeping, stopping, creeping again, clearly unsure. This time it waits, but with less of that twitchy motion. When a reasonable gap opens, it commits decisively, turns through, and completes the maneuver smoothly. No sudden braking, no halfway commitment then backing out. We mark it down: one challenging unprotected left, handled well, no intervention. A few blocks later, we test something that has annoyed a lot of FSD users: lane selection. We're approaching a major intersection where the right lane becomes right turn only, but that's not obvious until you're close to the intersection and can see the road markings. Google Maps or other systems might not always know this. A human can read the paint and signs. In previous versions, Tesla's car sometimes realized too late that it was in the wrong lane, then swerved or braked awkwardly to correct. This time, as we approach, the system reads the road markings early enough and gently signals, then slides one lane to the left well before the intersection. It's not perfect. There's a brief moment where it hesitates behind a slower car before deciding to go around, but it no longer feels like a last-second panic move. We hit our first real-world friction point at a crosswalk. There's no signal, but a pedestrian is standing at the curb looking at their phone, not obviously intending to cross yet. Some human drivers blast through, others slow just in case. The car sees the pedestrian and starts to slow more than a human behind us might expect. Not a full stop, but enough to feel a bit conservative. No one honks, but you could imagine that happening in heavier traffic. The system is erring on the side of caution, which is defensible from a safety standpoint, but it's still slightly out of step with human norms. We head deeper into the city core. Delivery trucks block a lane. Scooters jump out between parked cars. At one point, a large van is double parked, almost entirely blocking our lane, with a solid line separating us from the opposing lane and oncoming traffic approaching. Here, where earlier FSD versions sometimes froze or inched forward indecisively, unable to commit to crossing that line even briefly to go around the obstacle. In this test, the system slows, signals left, and waits for oncoming traffic to clear. The moment there's a usable gap, it confidently eases across the center line, passes the van, and tucks back into its lane. The maneuver feels more human-like and less jittery. Importantly, it doesn't linger side by side with the van in the middle of the road, something we've seen in older builds. We do need one intervention in this first city segment. A cyclist is riding close to parked cars on our right, slightly weaving to avoid a car door opening. The Tesla recognizes the cyclist and gives space, but it hugs the center line a bit more than we're comfortable with given oncoming traffic. It's technically safe, but we'd prefer a little more distance. Our safety driver nudges the wheel to shift the car slightly left in anticipation. That small steering input counts as an intervention. Speaking of interventions, that's a key way we measure better. We're not just asking, did it avoid a crash? We're asking, how often did a human feel the need to step in to prevent something unsafe, illegal, or socially unacceptable, like blocking an intersection or braking so hard that a rear-end collision becomes likely? From the city center, we head toward the freeway to test 14.2.2.4 in high-speed traffic. Historically, this is where Tesla's Autopilot roots shine. Highway driving has usually been the strongest part of the experience. We take a cloverleaf on-ramp that curves tightly onto a busy freeway. As we approach, the car slows appropriately for the curve, but not excessively. It holds the lane in the curve. Earlier versions sometimes ping-ponged or hugged the inside edge more dramatically, and accelerates smoothly onto the merge lane. Here's a key moment. The freeway is busy, cars zooming past at 10 to 15 miles per hour over the limit, gaps appearing and disappearing quickly. The Tesla signals, checks for a gap, and then crucially accelerates firmly enough to match traffic. This was a weakness in some earlier builds. The system would hesitate, then try to merge at a lower speed than surrounding traffic, which is both unnerving and potentially hazardous. In this update, it seems more willing to go once it decides, though always within legal speed constraints. We flow with traffic in the middle lane. The system adjusts to cars cutting in ahead of us with fewer abrupt braking episodes than we've experienced before. Phantom braking, those sudden, unexplained slowdowns for no apparent reason, has been one of the most frequent complaints about Tesla's driver-assist systems. In our highway segment with 14.2.2.4, we still see tiny, cautious slowdowns when a vehicle in the adjacent lane drifts slightly over the line. But we don't get the hard, seatbelt-tugging decelerations that used to spook passengers. Lane changes are also improved in subtle ways. When instructed to change lanes for an upcoming exit, the car starts planning earlier, scanning mirrors and blind spots more proactively. Instead of darting at the last second to grab a spot, it more often drifts into a newly opened gap in a way that feels natural and less mechanical. There are still cases where a human driver might seize a smaller gap more confidently, but for a supervised system prioritizing safety, this more measured approach makes sense. After about 20 minutes on mixed-speed roadway, we leave the freeway to explore suburban streets. Wide, tree-lined roads, a mix of four-way stops, school zones, and roundabouts, areas that have historically tripped up driver assistance systems. We approach a four-way stop at the same time as a car to our right. This is always a social dance. Both drivers are supposed to stop and then proceed in order of arrival. In reality, people wave each other through, inch forward, or ignore the rules altogether. In our test, the Tesla comes to a clear full stop, something it used to sometimes rush, then waits. The other car hesitates, then goes. Once they're committed, our car moves forward confidently without another delay. It's small, but it's the kind of timing nuance that affects how natural the system feels in a neighborhood. School zones present another challenge. Lower speed limits, lots of pedestrians, and at certain times, children near the road. Here, 14.2.2.4 behaves as you'd hope, slowing preemptively as we approach clearly marked school areas respecting reduced limits. It's still very literal. If signage isn't obvious or if local rules are unusual, it may not always know the full context, but where the cues are clear, it responds conservatively. Then there are roundabouts or traffic circles. Some older Tesla software struggled with these: awkward entries, last-second braking, confusion over right-of-way. In this test, we approach a medium-sized roundabout with multiple exits and steady traffic. The car slows early, scans, and waits for a gap. When it sees a clear opening, it rolls in smoothly, hugs the inner track, and signals before exiting. It feels notably more composed than earlier behavior we've experienced, with fewer abrupt speed changes inside the circle. Construction zones are a tougher story. We encounter a lane closure where temporary cones push traffic into a single lane. Some cones are perfect, others are slightly knocked out of place. The Tesla identifies the cones and begins moving away from them, but it's more cautious and slower than surrounding human drivers, creating a bit of an accordion effect behind us. It handles the layout correctly, no illegal moves, no cone strikes, but it does so at a speed that might irritate drivers who are used to powering through these makeshift chicanes. We log another minor intervention here. As we approach a flagger standing with a sign, the system slows but doesn't seem fully certain about whether to stop or continue. The human driver taps the brakes more firmly and takes over. This is a critical reminder. Construction, humans in the roadway, and non-standard signage are still trouble spots for many automated systems, and Tesla's is no exception. Our final test segment shifts to low light and more challenging visual conditions. Night driving has traditionally exposed weaknesses in camera-based perception: headlight glare, limited contrast, and unexpected objects on the road. After sunset, we enable FSD on a mix of lit and dimly lit roads. Lane keeping remains stable. The car tracks lane lines and road edges confidently in most circumstances. On well-marked streets, you might forget for stretches that a computer is steering. One notable behavior: pedestrian detection at night is conservative. A person standing on a corner waiting to cross triggers a more pronounced slowdown than during the day. In one case, a pedestrian wearing dark clothing, partly obscured by a parked SUV, is nevertheless picked up in the visualization. The car slows early, which feels a bit overcautious but arguably appropriate in poor visibility. If there's a trade-off to be made, being too cautious around people in the dark is the side you want to err on. Rain adds more complexity. On a wet, reflective surface with light rain, lane lines become harder to see. The Tesla continues to track them, but we begin to see slightly more small corrections in the steering, tiny, frequent adjustments which a sensitive passenger might notice. Nothing unsafe in our test, but it reminds you that perception is working harder in these conditions. We do not encounter a catastrophic failure, but we do choose to intervene twice at night. Once when a vehicle ahead of us brakes sharply to make an unexpected turn without signaling, and the Tesla reacts correctly, but perhaps a fraction of a second slower than a very attentive human might. And once when a cyclist without lights is riding close to the lane in particularly dark conditions. In both cases, our driver chose to step in early rather than wait to see whether the system would handle it optimally. So where does all of this leave us? Is 14.2.2.4 better? If we look at raw incidents in our test route, hard brakes, hesitations in intersections, confusing lane choices, and human takeovers, there is a clear pattern. Compared to previous generations of the software, this update behaves more smoothly and more predictably. It makes fewer obviously odd choices, it seems more decisive at tricky turns when it finally goes, and it cuts down on some of the most alarming sudden slowdowns, especially on the highway. In city traffic, the system seems to have improved in two key ways: timing and confidence. It's slightly better at reading when it's safe to do something, like complete that unprotected left, and when it should wait. When it chooses to move, it now commits more like a human driver, avoiding that half-go, half-stop behavior that could confuse other road users. In suburban and neighborhood driving, it respects rules more consistently. It comes to fuller stops, follows posted speed limits more faithfully, and navigates roundabouts and four-way stops with better flow. It still feels conservative in some situations, especially near vulnerable road users, pedestrians, and cyclists, but that conservatism is easier to defend. On the freeway, it shines. Smooth merges, smarter lane changes, and fewer phantom braking events make for a more comfortable ride. For long highway trips where traffic is not extremely chaotic, this version approaches what many people wish cruise control could be: something you can mostly rely on as long as you stay alert and ready to step in. But better isn't the same as done. There are still notable weak spots. Construction zones, flaggers, temporary signage, and highly unusual situations remain areas where human judgment is clearly superior. Nighttime and poor weather performance is good but not flawless, and drivers should still treat it as a tool, not a chauffeur. There's also the question of trust. Even if the system is statistically safer in some scenarios than an average human driver, each visible mistake, an overly cautious stop in a crosswalk, a late reaction to a strange merge, an awkward pause at a construction flagger, reminds you that this is still a beta-like technology. If you're expecting a car that can truly drive itself door to door with no human oversight, this update doesn't deliver that. It's not meant to, and regulators wouldn't allow that level of autonomy, yet anyway. The other dimension of better is comfort for everyone involved, not just the driver but passengers and other road users. A car that doesn't crash but drives in a visibly robotic or awkward manner can still create uncomfortable, even unsafe situations, prompting honks, sudden reactions from other drivers, or confusion about who should go next. In our time with 14.2.2.4, those socially awkward moments were fewer, but not completely gone. So how should a current Tesla owner think about this update? If you've used previous FSD versions and found them just on the edge of usable, solid enough for straight, predictable roads but unnerving in cities, 14.2.2.4 is likely to feel like a meaningful improvement. Fewer jerky maneuvers, better gap selection, more stable highway behavior. For regular commutes that combine city and freeway driving in clear weather, this may be the first version that feels, for many owners, like something they want to leave on most of the time rather than occasionally test. If you've never trusted driver assistance at all and are skeptical of the entire idea, this update probably won't convert you on its own. You'll still see moments where a human driver would read the situation differently, especially in messy, unstructured environments like active construction zones or chaotic downtown cores. From a safety perspective, the key takeaway is that this remains a supervised system. You cannot and should not think of it as self-driving in the everyday sense. When it works, it can reduce fatigue and handle some of the more tedious aspects of driving. When it doesn't, it can hand a complex situation back to you in a split second, and you need to be ready. From a technology perspective, 14.2.2.4 is another step along a long road, not the final destination. It showcases improvements in how the system predicts and responds to common road scenarios. It narrows the gap between robotic and natural driving behavior. It pushes a bit further into the space where software is not just following lines, but interacting with human traffic in a more nuanced way. So is this update better? Based on our real-world test, yes, in many practical ways it is. It's smoother, more composed, and more aligned with how real traffic actually moves, especially on highways and in straightforward city layouts. It still has blind spots, and it still needs a fully attentive human behind the wheel every second. If you treat it as a capable assistant rather than a replacement driver, 14.2.2.4 feels like one of Tesla's more solid and confidence-inspiring releases to date. But it's important to underline one last thing. Better doesn't mean you can relax. It means the system is progressing, fewer weird edge cases, fewer sudden surprises, more predictability. The responsibility and the liability still rest with the person in the driver's seat. As automakers, regulators, and the public continue to wrestle with how these systems should be tested, deployed, and described, updates like 14.2.2.4 offer a glimpse of a possible future in which cars handle more of the work more of the time. But for now, that future is still supervised, still partial, and still evolving, one update at a time. You've been listening to the Tech Road Report. For drivers considering whether to enable Tesla's latest FSD update, the bottom line is this: it's better, but it's not magic. Use it where it shines, watch it closely where it doesn't, and remember that, at least for now, the most important safety feature is still your own attention.